December 13, 1939. The crisp dawn over the South Atlantic is shattered by the silhouette of mastheads on the horizon. Aboard the Admiral Graf Spee, Captain Hans Langsdorff peers through his optics, identifying what he believes is a single British cruiser escorting a merchant convoy. His orders dictate strict avoidance of enemy warships, but the temptation of a vulnerable convoy proves too great. He orders his ship to close the distance, unaware that he is sailing directly into a meticulously coordinated trap. This single decision exposes the fatal flaw in the most celebrated naval design philosophy of the era. The German Panzerschiff, known as the pocket battleship, was built on a foundation of theoretical invincibility. Bound by the tonnage limits of the Treaty of Versailles, German engineers crafted a vessel mounting massive 11-inch guns on a cruiser-sized hull. The doctrine was arrogant. The ship would outgun any vessel fast enough to catch it and outrun any battleship heavily armed enough to destroy it. For 3 months, that theory terrorized the oceans. The Graf Spee operated as a phantom, a lone wolf commerce raider severing the maritime arteries of the British Empire. 9 merchant vessels had been intercepted and sunk, sending ripples of panic through global shipping markets. The ship was a strategic weapon designed for economic strangulation, forcing the Royal Navy to divert massive resources just to hunt a single elusive target across the vastness of the Southern Hemisphere. Yet the burden of this isolated command was quietly eroding the man at the helm. Langsdorff was a gentleman warrior of a fading era, strictly adhering to prize rules, ensuring not a single Allied sailor died during his raiding campaign. But the psychological weight of constant evasion, the endless horizon, and the mechanical strain on his vessel had taken a heavy toll. The hunter was exhausted, his judgment clouded by the relentless pressure of surviving alone in hostile waters. Thousands of miles away, British Commodore Henry Harwood mathematically deduced the Phantom's next move. Analyzing the scattered distress signals of the sunken merchantmen, Harwood calculated the raider's cruising speed and projected its trajectory toward the shipping bottleneck off South America. He divided his limited forces, gambling that the River Plate estuary would be the inevitable hunting ground. It was a masterstroke of predictive naval intelligence, placing 3 smaller cruisers exactly where the German Leviathan was headed. When the trap springs, the reality of real-world combat immediately shatters the German theoretical doctrine. HMS Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles do not flee from the superior firepower of the pocket battleship, they charge. Harwood splits his cruisers, forcing Langsdorff to divide his main armament. The Graf Spee cannot outrun the lighter ships, and by engaging them simultaneously from different angles, the British neutralize the German advantage in range and shell weight. The hunter is suddenly surrounded. The ensuing Battle of the River Plate is a crucible of fire and torn steel. The heavy cruiser HMS Exeter takes the brunt of the German fury, suffering devastating hits that obliterate its forward turrets and decimate the bridge crew. Yet, even as it burns and lists, Exeter remains in the fight, drawing the heavy 11-inch shells away from the lighter cruisers. Ajax and Achilles dart through the smoke screens, peppering the German raider with a relentless hail of smaller caliber fire. In the chaos of the exchange, a single hit permanently alters the strategic landscape of the war. A British shell penetrates the Graf Spee's unarmored bow, destroying the ship's fuel purification system. Without the ability to process its diesel reserves, the mighty raider is left with barely enough clean fuel for 16 hours of steaming. The ship is structurally sound, its main guns remain fully operational, but it has been effectively crippled by a fatal vulnerability in its complex engineering. Forced to break off the engagement, Langsdorff limps his damaged vessel into the neutral port of Montevideo, Uruguay. The tactical naval battle immediately transforms into a high-stakes diplomatic war. Under international law, a belligerent warship is allowed only a brief window to conduct emergency repairs in a neutral harbor before it must leave or face internment. The clock begins ticking, and the neutral waters of South America become the focal point of a furious geopolitical struggle between Berlin and London. British intelligence seizes the moment, launching a brilliant campaign of psychological warfare. Operatives in South America leak fabricated reports, ensuring the German command intercepts messages detailing the imminent arrival of a massive British fleet, including an aircraft carrier and a battlecruiser. In reality, Harwood's battered squadron is waiting alone just beyond the territorial limit, desperately bluffing. But the deception works flawlessly, convincing Langsdorff that an escape into the open Atlantic is mathematically impossible. Trapped between the ticking diplomatic clock and the phantom armada waiting offshore, the German captain faces an agonizing decision. He appeals to Berlin for guidance, but the High Command offers only rigid directives, demanding the ship fight its way out but forbidding internment in Uruguay. Langsdorff is left alone to weigh the lives of his crew against the prestige of the Third Reich. He recognizes that sacrificing his men in a hopeless battle against overwhelming odds serves no military purpose. On December 17th, the battered vessel slowly steams out of the harbor, watched by hundreds of thousands of spectators crowding the Montevideo shoreline. Just outside the 3-mile limit, the crew is quietly transferred to a waiting German freighter. Moments later, a series of catastrophic internal explosions tears through the hull of the Admiral Graf Spee. Plumes of black smoke and fire erupt into the sky as the pride of the German surface fleet settles into the shallow mud of the estuary. The scuttling is a profound humiliation for Berlin, but the tragedy of the command is not yet complete. 3 days later, in a quiet hotel room in Buenos Aires, Captain Langsdorff writes a final letter to his superiors, taking full responsibility for the loss of his ship. He then wraps himself in the ensign of the old Imperial Navy, rejecting the swastika, and shoots himself. He dies a casualty of a flawed doctrine, choosing honor over the senseless slaughter of his remaining crew. The sinking triggers an immediate and sweeping strategic collapse within the German Naval High Command. The fundamental premise of the Panzerschiff, that a lone, heavily armed raider could operate with impunity across the globe, is proven disastrously wrong. The battle demonstrates that even inferior enemy forces, if coordinated and aggressive, can inflict critical damage on a solitary vessel lacking localized air cover or fleet support. The era of the lone surface raider is abruptly ending. This realization forces a massive pivot in the naval war. Berlin recognizes that surface ships are too vulnerable and too expensive to risk in isolated commerce raiding. The failure in the South Atlantic directly accelerates the shift toward a much darker strategy. Resources and strategic focus pivot sharply toward the U-boat fleet, setting the stage for the brutal, unseen terror that will soon define the Battle of the Atlantic. The British Admiralty absorbs a completely different set of lessons. The victory validates their doctrine of aggressive pursuit and overwhelming numerical superiority. It proves that the vast web of the British Empire, supported by a global network of intelligence and logistics, can hunt down and corner any rogue asset. The Royal Navy confirms that control of the sea lanes requires not just heavy capital ships, but a swarm of versatile cruisers capable of projecting power across the globe. Beyond the tactical validation, the triumph provides an incalculable boost to Allied morale during the uncertain days of the phony war. Winston Churchill champions the victory, using the destruction of the German raider to galvanize a weary British public. It stands as stark, undeniable proof that the Nazi war machine is not invincible. The narrative of the courageous British cruisers taking down the armored giant becomes a foundational myth of the early war effort. Meanwhile, the surviving German crew members are left behind as forgotten pawns in a global conflict. Interned in Argentina and Uruguay, many of the sailors spend the entirety of the war in South America. They build new lives in the shadow of their sunken ship, a surreal existence far removed from the apocalyptic destruction consuming their homeland. Their quiet exile stands in stark contrast to the violent fate that awaited the submarine crews who took their place in the Atlantic. The wreck of the Admiral Graf Spee remains visible above the waterline for years, a rusting monument to a failed strategic vision. The German Navy never again attempts to rely on the pocket battleship concept. Future surface deployments will demand heavier armor, faster speeds, and entirely different operational parameters. The dream of a cheap, versatile wonder weapon capable of winning a naval war on the cheap dies in the shallow waters of the River Plate. Ultimately, the first major naval engagement of the conflict dictates the trajectory of the war at sea. The destruction of this single vessel reshapes the strategic calculus of two empires. It forces Germany into the depths with its submarine fleet and reinforces Britain's reliance on global intelligence networks and coordinated cruiser squadrons. The decisions made in the heat of that December morning ripple outward, altering the fate of the entire Atlantic theater. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button